Number 8. Eustaquio Galiz. While serving out a life sentence stemming from a murder conviction, Eustaquio Galiz, aged 51, was granted day parole. The conditional release meant that he was allowed to participate in public activities during the day as long as he returned to his halfway house nightly. Galiz had grown close to 22-year-old Marilyn Levesque, an escort who worked at an erotic massage parlor. On January the 22nd of 2020, the two met at a restaurant before checking into a hotel in Sainte-Foy, a borough of Quebec City. It was there that Galiz reportedly stabbed Levesque a total of 30 times. He'd originally planned to take his own life after carrying out the murder, but he instead decided on surrendering to the authorities. Levesque had reportedly grown distant from Galiz in the period leading up to her death. He'd thus become jealous and angry as a result of their deteriorating relationship, and ultimately resorted to killing her. He was first charged with second-degree murder, but those charges were eventually upgraded to murder in the first degree. He was given a second life sentence without the possibility of parole for 25 years. The incident that led to his initial incarceration had taken place in 2004. Galiz repeatedly stabbed his ex-wife, Chantal Deschamps, after striking her head with a hammer. His murderous rage had reportedly been triggered by her decision to leave him, and the violent attack had led to a life sentence with no chance of parole for 15 years. In November of 2021, a Quebec coroner ruled that Levesque's brutal death could have been avoided if Galiz had been ordered to wear an ankle monitor as part of his parole agreement. The coroner also recommended that equipping violent criminals with these monitors become standard procedure when they're released on parole. Number 7. James Dakota Brunson and Annika Celeste Thorpe. A 57-year-old Utah woman was found dead in her friend's driveway after being shot by two parolees during a random carjacking. The perpetrators, identified as 24-year-old James Dakota Brunson and Annika Celeste Thorpe, aged 23, had previously faced a slew of other charges that were mostly drug and theft related. According to reports, the pair killed Linda Nemelka, a mother of 5, on March the 11th of 2020. While attempting to steal her car. Due to the random nature of the crime, police struggled to identify any suspects during the ensuing investigation. It took more than a year for law enforcement to zero in on Brunson and Thorpe as the likely culprits. By then, both of them were already behind bars for completely unrelated offenses. Brunson had been arrested by narcotic detectives less than a day after killing Nemelka, and Thorpe was back in custody on felony theft charges just 5 days after the shooting had taken place. Investigators found DNA on the murder weapon that matched both Brunson and Thorpe, and the two were subsequently charged with Nemelka's murder. Number 6. Leland Guy Eagle Jr. A 36-year-old parolee was arrested for murdering his romantic partner after previously being convicted of other violent offenses. The body of Crystal Nelson, also aged 36, was discovered by the housekeeping staff at the Clarion Point Motel in Fresno, California. The victim had been fatally shot by a male acquaintance, later identified as Leland Guy Eagle Jr., who was out on parole for a past offense. The two were captured on surveillance cameras entering the motel together several hours before her death. Police arrived at Eagle's paroled address after determining the former inmate to have been the perpetrator of Nelson's killing. He was taken into custody and booked into the Fresno County Jail. He faced multiple charges stemming from the murder and the associated parole violation. Number 5. Christine Shreve Hubbs. After being incarcerated for engaging in intimate activities with two teenagers, 44-year-old Christine Shreve Hubbs of Livermore, California, was arrested again just 5 days after being released on parole. Hubbs had pleaded no contest to the charges associated with her past crimes. In 2011, she reportedly had improper contact with the two teenage victims from 2008 to 2010. She first pursued one of the boys when he was romantically involved with her teenage daughter. Hubbs was accused of luring her victims by giving them cash, expensive presents, and special cell phones they used to secretly communicate with her. She was arrested after the mother of one of the victims discovered explicit photographs of Hubbs on his phone. After being released from prison in February of 2013, Hubbs found herself back behind bars less than a week later. State parole agents made a surprise compliance visit to her residence, during which they found adult content within her possession, which was a violation of her parole. Following her arrest, the two victims of her previous crimes were harassed on social media by Hubbs' friends and family members. Livermore police subsequently investigated whether the threatening messages required any legal action to be taken against those involved. Number 4. Marco Quintanilla. A 19-year-old woman was murdered during Halloween weekend 2021, and the resulting investigation led to the arrest of 3 individuals, including an active duty member of the United States Air Force. The victim of the violent crime was Leilani Beauchamp, who was last seen leaving a Halloween party in the early morning hours of October the 30th. She was accompanied by 2 airmen identified as Juan Para Peralta, aged 20, and his roommate. Beauchamp's remains were later found by officers of the Fairfield Police Department in California on October the 31st. After a joint investigation by Fairfield Police and members of the Travis Air Force Base's Office of Special Investigations, it was established that Beauchamp had been murdered at Para Peralta's residence. The crime itself was carried out by a 27-year-old parolee named Marco Quintanilla and his sister, Jessica, aged 21. The authorities ultimately determined that Jessica had been the one to fatally shoot Beauchamp inside of Para Peralta's home, and Marco had subsequently tried to cover up the crime by hiding the body roughly 100 miles from the scene of the crime. Para Peralta was not charged in connection to the murder and had returned to the Travis Air Force Base as of November the 4th of 2021. Jessica Quintanilla was charged with the murder of Beauchamp, while Marco faced an accessory to murder charge in addition to a parole violation. Number 3. Obdulia Sanchez. Obdulia Sanchez, aged 20, was arrested after fleeing from a traffic stop in Stockton, California, in October of 2019. Just a month prior to the incident, Sanchez had been released on parole after serving more than 2 years in prison on a gross vehicular manslaughter conviction. The event that led to her initial imprisonment had taken place on July the 21st of 2017. She had crashed her car while driving under the influence of alcohol. The accident took the life of Sanchez's sister and severely injured another passenger in the vehicle. Sanchez reportedly live-streamed the entire ordeal on Instagram, and the video recording was subsequently used by prosecutors in support of their case against her. The young woman's second arrest was precipitated by a brief police chase at approximately 1:30 a.m. The pursuit was prompted by Sanchez's refusal to pull over for an officer attempting to initiate a traffic stop. Sanchez eventually drove her car off the road near a highway ramp off Interstate 5. A male passenger fled the scene after the crash while Sanchez was taken into custody. Officers discovered a loaded gun inside the vehicle, which led to Sanchez facing weapons charges in addition to the traffic-related offenses. Today's topic was requested by Marie O'Connor and Linda Ann. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. James Craig Dobson. A man convicted of criminally negligent homicide in connection to the beating and fatal stabbing of a homeless man in Boulder, Colorado, was granted parole in July of 2021. Upon his release, 60-year-old James Craig Dobson violated the terms of his newfound freedom and subsequently took part in a burglary. After he failed to check in with his supervision officers, a warrant for Dobson's arrest was issued. He was ultimately found by members of Boulder law enforcement who were investigating reports of a theft of frozen foods from an outdoor freezer. The arresting officers noted that Dobson appeared to be under the influence of alcohol, an additional violation of his parole. In September of 2021, he was charged with second-degree burglary, theft, and violation of a restraining order. Dobson had previously been charged with second-degree murder after he was found guilty of inflicting the wounds that had taken the life of Ronald DeQuina in 2018. Dobson had reportedly assaulted DeQuina and left him lying in a pool of his own blood. Although he was ultimately spared of the murder charge, Dobson was convicted of criminally negligent homicide and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was allowed out on parole after serving just 3 years of his term. Number 1. Brian Goldsby. A 21-year-old student at Ohio State University was murdered by a man previously in prison for robbing and taking advantage of a pregnant woman. On February the 8th of 2017, Regan Tokes was leaving her job at a restaurant and bar called Bodega in downtown Columbus. The young woman was abducted by Brian Goldsby, a felon who'd been granted an early release from his 6-year prison sentence in November of 2016. Goldsby forced Tokes to drive him to 2 different ATMs to withdraw cash. He subsequently abused her inside of the vehicle and then made the decision to murder her in order to conceal his crimes. He made Tokes drive to Scioto Grove Metro Park in Grove City. She was then ordered to remove all of her clothes, and Goldsby walked her into the middle of a field at gunpoint. He fatally shot her, execution style, in the back and side of the head. After the murder, Goldsby drove to his girlfriend's home and gave her Tokes' purse and wallet as a gift. He then dumped the murder weapon into a sewer and unsuccessfully tried to set Tokes' car on fire to destroy any evidence of the crime. He was eventually tracked down by investigators and remanded into custody by a SWAT team. He was sentenced to life in prison in March of 2018. Thanks for watching. Would you plead guilty to a crime you didn't commit if it meant you'd be granted parole? Let us know in the comments section below.